All right, now we're preparing. I just had to like finagle the group, but we are good. Always a
We're live. How exciting.
1 sec. All right. We are set. We are live on Aerogram Art Center's page. Okay. So let's wait a couple minutes just to let people trickle in and so we can get ready, but we are ready to share our experiences as the founders of Aerogram Art Center.
Oh.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we can. Well, I think let's just start, and then as people trickle in. But hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Meet the Founders event at the Aerogram Center for Arts and Culture. My name is Isabel Pardo. You may have seen me before in conversation with Gabriel Soto, our previous solo show artist. I'm the programs coordinator for the Aerogram Center, and here with me today on Zoom is the very first founder herself, Zoe Elena Moldenhauer. So right now, the Aerogram Center is an online arts collective, fine art and literary magazine, and podcast aiming to provide opportunities during the pandemic closure. And this is actually the first time like ever that we are here together in conversation, both of our faces in public. So this is very exciting. And we're just here to share who we are and what we do behind the scenes at the Aerogram Center. We're celebrating our first year anniversary this month. So lots of changes, lots of developments in the past year and hopefully in the years to come. And I'm tuning in from Baltimore, Maryland, and Zoe is in Brooklyn, New York at the moment. And so we'd just like to say that before we begin, we are a very new collective. So if you are interested in what we're doing and what we hope to do in the future, please consider donating by going to our website at aerogram.org/support. Your contributions are really why our events and programs are possible with no paywall so that everyone can participate for free worldwide. So we really appreciate it and thank you. So as we jump in right now, we're going to share our screen and do a little bit of an artist talk from both of us. We are both studio artists outside of this with backgrounds in both painting, art history, and curatorial studies. And you'll hear our whole backstory of how we came together. So let's do this. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And yeah, go for it, Zoe.
All right. Hopefully this works. Well, yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me and Isabel as we celebrate our 1-year anniversary. My name is Zoe Elena. I'm the founder of the Aerogram Center for Arts and Culture. And like Isabel, I will, show you examples of my work and my past curatorial practices. Yeah, so I'm a painter from Brooklyn, New York. My painting practice develops through an invented alphabet, exploring sentence structures and linguistics to create a world that coexists with the modern reality. My painting sort of rescripts language into code, manifesting map making, and text as abstractions. Image on the screen is not mine, but I'll get to it in a second. I developed this idea in 2017 during my junior year in undergrad. And I took a class on 20th century Latin American art. And this was the first time really learning about diversity that so many of us ask for in education settings. So on the slide is a work by Sul Solar, who's an Argentinian artist interested in astrology and mathematics. And through this development of work, he created his fictional language called Pen Lingua. And I really love these playing cards. You know, he's invented board games. His paintings explore sort of more in depth of this fictional world that he's kind of creating. But what I like about these playing cards is that they can both function as astrology, that but also that when you combine them or place them in different ways, or if they fall in a certain order, that you're basically creating a rhythmic language. Which I really enjoy. So I can't remember which came first, knowing of this artist or doing this painting. I didn't plan this piece out, and it took months to kind of get to this stage. And I actually really hate this painting. It was horrible, and the white lettering was very random. And when I presented it, a professor kind of made some assumptions about, you know, like the style of lettering in relation to who I was. And through that difficult conversation, which was uncomfortable for both of us to have, she, the suggestion that she made was, if you're going to create symbols or language, you have to give them meaning. And so that was what really motivated me in kind of pursuing what I was pursuing, a fictional alphabet. And so there were many paintings between the one that I just showed and this one. But I was experimenting with a set of characters, and I think it was this series of 12 of 8x8 paintings where I really kind of settled on a language and knew how they were kind of being adjoined together. So I think, I've never really showed this piece kind of outside of sort of non-serious places. In some works I get more text-based and begin by assigning a character a color. So this is where the code comes in. And I understood that only I could read these works, or at least the language part of it. And I wanted to give the viewer an access point into being able to read, whether it's sort of up and down or right to left or left to right. And so that having that grid is something that kind of follows through a lot of my work, as in terms of like directional cues. And at this time, I was looking at artists like Alfred Denson and Leslie Roberts, who were creating complex thoughts and ideas using the grid to create a new form of literacy. I really enjoy these artists and how it's both pattern making, but it's also secretive. And I just enjoy that. I also started making maps, so I'm gonna jump forward for a second. So this is a series of paintings or small drawings that I made. But in that same sort of 20th century Latin American art class, I learned about Joaquin Torres Garcia. And if you're a listener to our podcast, I actually brought him up when we were featuring Gabriel Soto. So check it out. But this piece, America Inverted, is a small drawing of Latin America flips upside down, putting North America at the bottom. And I thought, when I learned of this drawing, I thought it was revolutionary, that it was challenging sort of our Western-centric ways of thinking, of position, of space, and introducing Latin American indigenous symbols like the sun, which is a pre-Columbian symbol of duality and of living. So it was here that I began exploring perceptions of space and communication, and removing anything that would indicate a north versus a south, east versus west, that have historically created power imbalances, sort of racial superiority, colonialism, etc. But I think in this series, I also contradicted myself. In the series of 12, I was thinking about New York City's MTA subway system, and how some boroughs are easily accessible, like getting into Manhattan and maneuvering around Manhattan. But when you try to get into boroughs like Queens or the Bronx, it takes hours. And it's usually like always under construction. So you're like, it's double the time to commute. And sort of in creating this series, I wanted to understand what it meant to draw out accessibility or the lack of it. That series of 12 came to be like an isolated moment within a neighborhood, but then placed together, sort of like that each drawing can kind of be isolated, but then when they come together, that you can follow like one color line. Like, how do you figure out to get from like point A to point B? Yeah, so for a lot of my paintings, I give myself rules. One of them is always starting with a grid and then working through the 90-degree angles, and creating space within a 2D plane. The painting on the right is a series of 6 that incorporate the same style of map making, sort of at that kind of purple black bar at the bottom. With, then adding 3-dimensional elements like that tracing paper, and kind of thinking about architecture, which is meant to be very rational and scientific, but then creating something that is absolute nonsense. And then the logic starts to fall apart. And I really kind of enjoyed creating this series of 6 that just didn't follow any rules, but that pretended to look like it did. The other piece on the right was made during the pandemic. And it's a series of 4. 2 other are more text-based and almost hieroglyphic. Well, this one and another one look more mathematical. And I was exercising and kind of trying to play with composition. And I just, out of the 4, I really enjoy this piece. Yeah, so based on where I am in my research with this fictional alphabet, it can be more text-based or more abstract. So with these 2 works, I've abstracted a group of characters that are contained within a grid. The one on the left follows an old rule of giving a character a set of colors as a way to kind of enter into that space. So on the top right corner, there's like the green, yellow, black, and brown, and that appears in 2 other places. There's a pink, green, black, and red that appears in 2 other places. And so there's at least a pattern that's starting to evolve within that, where the painting on the right, I was more interested in trying to break that grid, but still having a grid, and using only a set of colors and not giving an individual character or symbol, its own individual color. So yeah, this is ongoing. There's plans to make one more. Yeah, and then this piece is kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't really think of it. It was something that I just sort of did, which I think is good, because if you're not really thinking about something but you want to create something, it sometimes is a good piece. And in this one, they were individual canvas that I kind of drew Sharpie on top, and then stitched together, because I really liked how they kind of folded and it was sort of accordion-like. And I was thinking about sort of like actual map making and cartography in that way, and how like folds can kind of change and take shape in a different way. So yeah, that's at least my artistic practice. So in addition to that, I also have a curatorial one. And in undergrad, I was the president of the Hispanic Latino Student Union, which was a student-run organization that hosts social events, programs, and exhibitions specific to the Latino student body. I think I didn't really understand how important representation was until entering into undergrad. And as I got older, I started to kind of center myself within this artistic Latino community. And the artists I met through the student organization are close friends of mine. A few have been featured at the Aerogramme Center. And this exhibition, Sign Language, was my last exhibit before graduating. And it looked at how language can be a tool or a medium that explores identity and self-expression. And it was an exercise in collaboration between students and faculty, which was really exciting that it wasn't just student exhibition, that, you know, there were more people that were interested in participating. And then sort of another project I'm really proud of. So in 2017, I was part of this exhibit called American Made, which explored the US criminal justice system and exploitation of inmate labor. And in doing the research, it was a team of 9 and myself wanted to explore how private corporations profited off of inmate labor and, you know, abuse the constitutional laws, you know, that allowed for low wages, the punishment of individuals years after being released from prison, debt accumulation when in prison, state by state criminal law that like racially targets Black and brown people, and kind of creates a cyclical environment where even if you do leave, you end up kind of being sucked back in. And so the exhibit was kind of compiled by artists and activists, formerly incarcerated artists, who were using creativity as a means of resistance. And so I think it wasn't just a curatorial exhibit, that we also built programs, you know, to both educate ourselves and the community specific to Baltimore City, and trying to understand those racial tensions that still exist. So yeah, that is me. And I guess I will hand it over to you, Isabel.
Yeah. Okay. So now, okay, now I have control. Yeah. My practice as a studio artist revolves around painting. I think both in 2D and 3D. These are what I'm considering my 3D paintings. I work a lot with both like 2D media and abstracting in 3D media, which I'll get into. This was the beginning of a practice that I started calling classical abstraction, which I would take a classical painting or historic painting and abstract it in a 2D form, typically in like a painting. I work majority of the time in water media. And then I would take that watercolor painting and abstract it into like an explosive installation. So this is Magdalene, which was based off of a Magdalene painting, and The Ideal City, which is a painting that is in the Walters Art Gallery in Baltimore, but then there's a couple sisters of it around the world. And this is really the beginning of my experimentation in this thought process, which I started to continue with my series in my junior year at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Transfigural Isolations, which I did a series of 3 painting installations, where I was really thinking of everything, like painting as collage, and really everything as collage. And I'll show you, I was doing 3 bodies of work at this time that all involved this idea of like assemblage and collage. So playing with this historical work of Bellini at the time, just because I tend to work with materials that I have picked up or salvaged or found on the side of the street. And in this case, I had a book of Bellini's paintings that I picked up on the side of the road. And so that was the inspiration for all of these works. This was from a portion of an altarpiece. And these 2, the one on the left was just a normal oil painting that was done in his later years. And then the one on the right is like a painting of his 4 allegories that were made for a cabinet, and that was like his mid-career. So I kind of spanned different time and space. And I think similar to what you were talking about, Zoe, about this idea of language and symbolism, I definitely think about in my work, when obviously I interpret it in a different way. I really place the idea of the universal language or recycled language and recycled symbolism and how meaning can transverse time. And with the idea of like abstracting from one image to a different image to a 3D image, it's almost like a game of telephone and like how things are distorted over time. And coming from this space, similar to you, as a like from a Latinx background, but from a biracial household, I'm trying to think about how I address space and how I take up space, especially as a woman artist and curator. And this is one of the series that I was doing at the same time in 2019, where I was taking these literal symbols and I was creating new ones, like using the known symbols to create the unknown symbols to create this like language, almost tarot card-esque, or like a sanctuary of like, people kept asking me if I was going to make a book of like, just to create this language, but no one knows what it means. Everyone is up to interpret their own, whatever they want to hear from it, which I really like, asking a lot of questions in my work and not necessarily giving all of the answers. So space, how things are displayed in space, and also space like within the paintings. And this I wanted to include, this is the third like piece from the body of work I was doing, like those 3 separate bodies of work. And this was one that I addressed more of my Costa Rican identity with. I think working together in Hispanic Latino Student Union at MICA was really interesting for me, Zoe, because I feel like we both have unique experiences, almost like very American experiences coming from cultures, but I always knew my culture in the context of the country that we came from, rather than being more like actual Costa Ricans when we would visit my family there, than knowing what a Costa Rican American culture would be. So that was one thing I was exploring after my whole family was together for the first time in 10 years, like all of us in one place all together. And then later on, in the beginning of 2020, I was spending time in Italy. And this was created right after COVID began and I came back to the States. So I was using this symbology that I was using like and learning about and viewing there, and like taking bits and details of different paintings and altarpieces and iconography that I found and created this long piece. I really love making long, like uncomfortably sized work, but it just is so satisfying to me. And snakes always come into play. This is the beginning of my current series of work called Have You Seen the Horseman Yet?, which is my current thesis work about the ideas and mythologies of the apocalypse, but as a renewal and a rebirth. So I'm trying to be very hopeful and optimistic about everything. So it's a mix of water media paintings as well as oil paintings, then constructed into these like vast installations. And I like all these framing devices. So in the physical oil paintings, I was addressing the sides as frames, and then like the ideas of top frame versus bottom frame versus like an inner and like an inset box and overlays. So I wanted to be like very spiritual, but also like psychedelic. Bedazzling, and everything has some sort of glitter or rhinestone or gold leaf. So here's my bedazzled skeleton. And this is very rooted in my research in alchemy and mysticism and all those practices, as well as my personal spiritual practices rooted in witchcraft. And this one especially is rooted in like divination and tarot reading. It's inspired by the 7 of Cups in tarot. And this is my installation for that first set of works. I'll be debuting my most recent, the second set of works coming from this series very soon. But this is called Tea Time with the Void. So I'm thinking about the apocalypse almost as like a way to accept how everything is happening right now with the pandemic. I'm trying to be hopeful, trying to be optimistic, but at the same time, there's these moments where it's like almost like dealing with the stages of grief, where in this installation, for example, I'm thinking about the void. So you're sitting with yourself and you're having these moments of introspection, but also just very deep sadness and like wondering of what's going to happen in the future. So these are some details from that. And then the sister installation that was done a couple weeks ago is called The Cocktail Hour of the Apocalypse, which is on the flip side. It's a collective experience. So I had friends who were safe, COVID friendly to all attend and experience the space and be photographed and documented within this, like the party on the last night of the world. So yeah, creating and exhibiting in very specific spaces is really what I strive to achieve. And so some of my curatorial work, this is in the Baltimore Appeal Center in the spring of 2019, entitled Historically Hysterical. And this was on the topic of anarcho-feminism, which is like a type of feminism where they believe that everything should be horizontal. Women are not better than men are not better than women. There's no, it's all anti-racist, environmentally sustainable. Everyone should be level in politics and in like socially. So we had a big group of artists, from fiber artists to a feminist punk band to like a curated library from a Baltimore local coffee shop and bookstore that's like anarchist based, as well as like installations, photography, everything. And it's also a very historic space. I forgot to mention, it was the first space created in the United States to actually be a museum. And then all these men who kept running it like created it into different forms, but none of it ever like succeeded. So it was like a school, it was like the mayor's office, like it didn't stay a museum for long. So it's a very interesting history. And then one of my most recent projects was the very first day of 2021, we opened This Is Not the End, which was a collaborative exhibition with a friend of mine at the Mason Gross School of the Arts, Johanna Cordasco, and we created a virtual exhibition for a bunch of undergrad students who didn't have any access to exhibition space. So we ended up showcasing 14 students from 4 different undergraduate programs in this virtual exhibition, as well as a physical catalog that was sent to everyone. And then we created this mobile exhibition in the form of a pair of pants. So, and everything's archived on Instagram at thisisnottheend_ex. And that is my artist talk. So yeah, a little bit about both of us behind the scenes of what we do outside of Aerogram, before Aerogram. So let's jump into some questions. And if you haven't done so already, or if you didn't hear our introductions, if you have available to do it, please consider donating what you can by going to our website at aerogram.org/support, so we can continue doing things like this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and Zoe and I will ask some questions to each other, and we will very gladly integrate yours as well. So just a little bit about me, besides my experience as a painter, as a MICA student. Zoe and I actually first met in MICA while I was a freshman and she was a junior. We met through this Hispanic Latino Student Union. I helped put on some shows that she was curating. She helped guide me through my time at MICA, and then here we are here together. So I'm curious to know from you, Zoe, like, how about, what about your curatorial practice? Like, how did you come into this? Like, how did you start developing Aerogram? And like, why did you want to do curating?
Yeah, So in freshman year of undergrad, I was introduced to the Hispanic Latino Student Union. A friend of mine at the time, was like, you should come. And I really didn't understand like what an identity-based organization was. And it was like a Wednesday night. But it was a lot of fun, I think, because it was a small and intimate group. And the mission of that student organization was to support and engage the Hispanic Latino student body. And we were like 6.5%, over my 4 years at least. We were like a very small demographic.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think being a member, I got to work on my first, or at least assist on, a curatorial project hosted by the previous president, which was called Perpetually in Between. So it was a group exhibition that explored the experience of being a third culture kid. And third culture kid means being raised in a culture outside of your own country or nationality. And so many of the students presented works that explored racial stereotypes, living alone away from your parents for the first time, kind of, issues around immigration. And it was like the first time that an exhibit that I at least could remember that had sort of a concentration of sort of autobiographical through visual storytelling. And I think that was sort of what set a light bulb off in my head, that I was really excited to see how these issues are being addressed, but through visual means. And I knew then that I really wanted to pursue what it meant to be a curator, and how to just sort of gather people in a space to have these conversations. And so by the end of my freshman year, I became the president, and I sort of made it my mission to continue that theme of exhibiting, kind of celebrating sort of an underrepresented community, to create exhibits, to have fun, to support each other. And many of us are still good friends sort of after, at least sort of, kind of going forward. Yeah.
Built a community. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so eager to like come and be a part of Aerogram, because you started doing things and you started posting on Instagram, and I kept seeing it. And I'm like, what is Zoe doing? What is she up to? And yeah, just seeing how strong the work that you're doing as part of HLSU in school made me really curious to see what was happening outside and just the possibilities that could happen. So I'm very glad that I reached out that one night and see what was happening. Yeah. So could you talk more about this like idea of like exploring the intersection of art and activism in your curating and artistic practice? Because I feel like it's also like the way that you talk about it, it's also very much about being a vehicle for social change, which integrates itself with Aerogram's mission statement. If you'd like me to read that, I can.
Sure.
So yeah, did I lose it? That's funny, actually. I think I misplaced it. That's really funny, actually.
Well, Aerogram's mission is
yes,
to support and further sort of artists and writers from around the world during the pandemic closures. And I think, so, I mean, on a personal level, I believe that art is a form of activism, that it can mobilize, that it is kind of transforming, that it is both individual but a collective sort of mindset. And so, I mentioned in my slides that one of my biggest projects was, exploring the prison industrial complex through visual, performative, and literary means. And I think only bringing a group of artists together, that are touching on a similar subject only does so much. I also believe in educational and public programming, that there needs to be the listening and the talking part of it. Because if you don't have that, then it then sort of the activism part isn't engaged. Yeah, and definitely listening to people and artists and individuals who, you have to be able to listen and hear what they have to say, what their stories are, how they're trying to explore their stories through one of, one of our first solo artist, Nicholas B Jacobson, who we featured on the Aerogramme Center, is a great example of an artist who is creating art, but also creating education around his work and around Mormonism and white supremacy, and working to deconstruct those ideologies. And I'm grateful to have had him featured and to continue that relationship after, supporting an artist, but also supporting an organization. And so for the Aerogramme Center, I think, we're interested, at least in that aspect, like looking for artists that are commenting on an issue or a theme, and that, how that kind of transforms can be so, that there's an infinite possibilities of doing that, that you don't sort of need to have an answer at the end of the work that you're presenting, but like, what are the stages? Like, how did you come to those questions? Why are you asking those questions? And at least provide a solution, like, what do you believe can be sort of the outcome of these issues that you're trying to raise? Yeah, I think definitely more in sort of storytelling, at least in our kind of curatorial mission.
Yeah, it's almost like that first exhibition, the visual storytelling, but then also with like creating conscious, like, visual storytelling.
Yeah, and it's not just supposed to be on the artists as well, that we're also, that as curators, we're here to support artists and help them through at least the talking and the listening, that we're working on trying to have different access points into these works, that it's not just looking at it on a screen, because that can be so exhausting. Yeah.
But since we're talking about the screen, can you talk a little bit about like the mission to provide these multi-digital opportunities because of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I guess when I started this project in 2019, it was with a former classmate from the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I think, he had graduated a year or more before I had. And so for me, it had been 4 months. And I think for both of us, we were finding it hard to self-discipline to make art outside of having a studio space, the security of sort of the education and development. Sorry, my dog is snoring. It's really funny. Yeah, but I think, there's so much pressure for young artists who are graduating from private art colleges, to make it in the art world. And it's so much pressure, and I think I chose to stay in Baltimore a year after, and I didn't have any money, I didn't have a job, I was sort of like really lost for a short period of time, kind of looking back at it now. So at least the origins of Aerogram were meant to kind of be a support network for artists who were kind of feeling that same way. And I think that has continued now, after the pandemic hit and so many of our lives were disrupted, that, we didn't, at least I knew that that something could keep going even if the world stopped, that you don't need a physical space, that you can kind of transform the digital and continue to support people, even if you can't physically be there. And so I think that, sort of where Aerogram started as sort of an idea to where it is now, I think it's kind of stayed core to at least that mission. Yeah.
I definitely think so. I always found it really impressive, like especially when I came in and it was just a solo project that you were handling, And I was like, there's so many moving parts to it, which I'm really like proud to say that we have all those because it provides more opportunities for more people. And
Yeah,
so
definitely.
since we are talking about like this is our 1 year anniversary, like I guess you kind of went into how this project began, but is there any specific visions that you have like based off of this 1 year where you've been official, like any visions that you started that you'd like to bring in to the future?
Well, when my former business partner and I, like in 2019, we were kind of thinking of it as like a pop-up that we would kind of go around within the Baltimore community and engage the artists that were living there in that city that didn't have studio spaces or working out of their bedrooms, people who just graduated, or people who were just generally interested in pursuing an art career. And so that was sort of the part of the vision that we had. But I don't know, I really enjoy the idea of sort of being a pop-up that now you and I can like travel the world or travel around the country, and once COVID is over. But I think I enjoy that idea of going to a place and engaging people within that's very specific location wise, and instead of having people to come to you. I think yeah.
It's funny because we're almost doing
just a personal
we're like the world is being engaged with us, but we are not moving. Okay. So
yeah.
One thing that I always like to, or one thing that I always asked you when I came in was talk about the logo and like the name and where did this come from? I feel like it's also very poignant to where we are right now.
Yeah, so the logo, I think Aerogram had a different name, but I think like just as March was happening and I was going back and forth between Baltimore and New York, sort of coinciding with that time, we were bringing boxes home, like sort of, so just like boxes of stuff that belonged to my grandparents, and inside one of these giant boxes were all these old Aerogram letters, which is the envelope and the letter being one and the same to kind of save money on airmail, because everything is done by weight. So like you pay more for a package, you pay more for like a heavy envelope. But I think as sort of technology change and communication change, like now we have the email. So it was a short-lived moment of mail history. I find sort of that very fascinating. But I really like the idea of transformation, that something could take on more than one form and that could adapt in the way that the Aerogram airmail could. And kind of also having an interest in zine culture and how it's sort of self-published and self-distributed, that it kind of works and touches on themes that are not sort of seen in mainstream publishing, or just it's circulated, that it also kind of exists within the digital world as well, that it's sort of easily accessible from anywhere at any time. And I think those two things, and of transformation of information, is what I was thinking about sort of like during March. And I remember just like, what, I feel like, the word itself is really cool. Like it's a very retro word, but it does have significant meaning in our identity and who we are, that at a time that was so, we were like, there was no information that was going on, that we were all finding out like months after, like when the rest of the world was sort of, kind of trying to, doing crisis management and all of that. Like, I think information was just not present. So how do we kind of, as young people, kind of entering into sort of job markets and kind of questioning sort of the systems that exist, like how do we kind of do better, and think better and be better. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's, the logo and our name it's about transformation, definitely taking on more than one form.
Yeah, I love that. That's like such a good message. And I feel like also like the story of the aerogram, it kind of goes along with what we have for the open call right now too, of like isolated but not alone, and how we are connecting over space and time. So I'm excited to see what people enter for that, because I think it's a really good message
I
we
know.
need to spread right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, so I have some questions for you as well. And I think, the first, I think you kind of touched a little bit on it in the beginning, but I I would love to learn more about sort of like where you were when you were learning about Aerogram, and kind of what led you to kind of reach out, kind of out, from being a friend and a classmate to now being sort of a business partner.
Yeah, I was having one of my many 2020 existential crises. Because I was reaching out to a bunch of people like in this field last year, but then I continually saw the work that you were doing, and I was like, well, now's the time to just like reach out, because if I don't do anything now, then like what's gonna happen? Like, can't hurt just to reach out to an old friend. So I just I remember seeing all like the dilettantism exhibition and all those open calls and just the work that was being made. And like I slowly saw this develop into something. So I was just like, what is she doing? Like, is she by herself? Like, what's happening? So I was just curious. And that's what gets me into half of the things that I do, is just being curious about something. So, and now I'm here. Look at me now.
Yeah, I definitely, was happy to hear from you, because I know like we share the same degree, the undergraduate degree. You're currently kind of working on yours, you're wrapping up. You got this. You're in the thick of it, but you got this. But yeah, I think, what's interesting, and sort of like when we were kind of preparing for this, virtual event that you had talked about, like how, my curatorial interests are in kind of activism and art being a vehicle for social change. But for you, you're kind of looking at how feminism, like different fields of feminism, can mobilize, and challenge, like space, and how you like take over space. So I was just wondering, like, how are you going to bring those themes to Aerogram as well? Yeah.
Well, I think right now, especially since I have this title of programs coordinator, is just trying to be able to engage people, trying to be able to create spaces to educate, to talk, and just are very open and accessible. And really, like my ideas about feminism, even though that's just like an undercurrent of the work that I do. And since I am a woman, and since that's how I define myself as a curator, it's just being conscious of the content that I am creating, like as an artist, but also the stories that I am telling, what spaces I am like intervening, what spaces that I'm creating for different voices. And really, what I define as feminism is also just being anti-racist, being environmentally conscious, and being aware of all the systems that exist in our world. So I think based on what you know about activism and all the resources that you're already putting towards on our website. It's just like continuing those prospects and learning, always learning.
Yeah, I love that. And then like you're already doing like amazing things behind the scenes. I'm really excited for that. And I think so. Kind of going back to your presentation, what I really enjoyed is that like your work kind of is exploring alchemy, but I'm also curious, like, what does alchemy look like in the 21st century?
I like
Because now we're such a modern age and we're so digital. Like, I'm wondering, like, how sort of like I think sort of mythological alchemy versus like everyday.
Well, yeah. So I think, well, since I'm talking about the apocalypse and like been thinking about that, and we're in the thick of a pandemic, I believe that alchemy right now is very similar to what you were saying with our logo and our mission is to be able to be in this transformative state. So it may be from one thing into another. And the thing with like traditional alchemy is to turn lead into gold, which is the idea of the philosopher's stone. You have to destroy the lead. So you have to destroy something to make something new. And so it's this constant cycle. So even though the realm of the art world that we didn't think that this was going to happen, and like the in-person galleries, if that didn't like go away because of COVID for a minute, like Aerogram would have never existed in the capacity that it does right now. So it's destruction to build something new.
Yeah. And I think you kind of mentioned like how naming something is a practice of alchemy, that it is so that once you name it gives it new meaning, that it's also part of this transformation. And I was just wondering like how you're exploring language in alchemy in your own work.
Yeah. So everything that I do is really rooted in symbolism, and I do a lot of research into everything that I do, into these symbols, into these like concepts. And especially with this, what I've been working with now, because it's also been very personal. So I'm doing a lot of research, but it's also been probably the most natural body of work, I want to say. Like it just, certain images just like came to me, and a lot of times the titles came to me before the imagery did. So it's this active like creation of like almost like spell work and giving it life. So when I'm thinking about language too, in the terms of the apocalypse or in terms of this like transformative yet destructive alchemy, it's being able to give life to something, but create this like universal language of these symbols that have been present for like history in like so many years. But what does this mean when people aren't here to interpret them? And so that's just what's been on my mind.
Yeah. And I think, kind of in conversation, like outside of sort of, just like chit chatting between you and me, I think what I was always interested was sort of the relationship between sort of not necessarily sort of commodity fetishization of an object, right? That like people place immense emotions and attachments towards an object. I was just wondering if like part of that, like you were exploring sort of these relationships between sort of like the human and the object, and sort of like these kind of Marxist theories. Yeah.
I haven't gone into a deep dive into Marxist theory, but from like how you have addressed it to me, I don't, it's interesting because I feel like I'm both precious and not precious about my materials, because I literally pick up trash off the street. Like if I just picked up last week like a box of stuff that I found on the side of the road. So like if I'm salvaging these like secondhand materials or picking up trash, but also making this like traditionally fine art and like paintings, it is commodifying, but I feel like all art is in a way commodifying if you're in this to sell and show and being this traditional process. This could be a very long conversation, but from right now, like, I'm thinking about more materials and how I'm using them. But I think everyone's a little bit precious about the work they do if they are an artist, especially in a capitalist society.
100%. I totally agree with that. Yeah, and I guess sort of going off of that, your two recent projects, Tea Time with the Void and The Cocktail Hour of the Apocalypse, kind of explore the individual apocalypse and the sort of transitions to a collective apocalypse, both exploring sort of the stages of grief. And so, like, in world building, what comes after sort of the cocktail hour?
Yeah.
Is it anarchy?
I don't think, see, anarchy is an interesting definition because from that show, I did a lot of research into it. And what I can summarize is that anarchy isn't necessarily chaos. So I think if you think of it in like an ecologist point of view, like maybe the apocalypse is the end of the Anthropocene, the end of humanity, but the world lives on. There's a book called The Mushroom at the End of the World, which is like this species of mushrooms that thrives in all these forests that like humanity, like humans have been inhabiting. So life will go on, just life without us. So that's the Tea Time with the Void is like me trying to accept that and accept all of the work and like my life coming to an end. And then the Cocktail Hour of the Apocalypse is like having the acceptance moment of like, well, it's happening. It's a universal experience. No matter like who we are, where we are, we're going to come together and have this one last moment together. And maybe we'll have the archive of the post-apocalypse. We shall see.
Yeah, I'm excited to see like what comes out because your work is so experimental and I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, so keep us updated.
Yeah, it's been a weird ride, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about
Yeah.
the future. Since we're talking about the end of the apocalypse, maybe the pandemic is our current apocalypse is coming to an end. So what do we have in store for Aerogram? We've run the numbers.
Yeah. There's still some numbers that we have to crunch because we're kind of working on our final group exhibit, Isolated but Not Alone. And so that'll end May 29th for the deadline to apply. But I think, we're going to continue sort of featuring artists on a solo and kind of group platform that we're going to continue to do that. And we're really excited. I think it just sort of happened organically last semester. So I think, Isabel, you are looking to kind of have at least start kind of looking at certain artists that you're interested in featuring. There's infinite possibilities for our exhibiting platform. But for our mobile library magazine, for volume 2, we're really excited. We kind of like chose the theme of mythology that we're going to explore sort of through our quarterly issues, 4 different lens of mythology and like what
I'm excited
and like how. Yeah, and so we're excited for that. And then our podcast series is going to look at sort of knowledge enclosure in museums and how that has led to theft of cultural and ritual objects, reduction of culture, and kind of the construction of colonial narratives within museums. So our podcast is going to take a very specific shift where it's going to interview the artists that we featured, but it'll have the sort of additional theme that's going to that we're we're going to take on the sort of that activism part of our name, and we're just gonna run with it. So yeah, we're excited for that.
Yeah, a new shift, a new chapter. Okay, well, I'm seeing some questions coming in from Facebook, so let's take a look. So Zoe, what most surprised or pleased you in like getting Aerogram launched, and has the experience influenced your practice as an artist?
Yeah, I think when I launched Aerogram, the first exhibit, so my business partner before you, we kind of workshopped this exhibit dilettantism, and we were interested in sort of, I think definitely just sort of, it was a cold open call that we like didn't know anybody, that it was people from around the world that ended up applying. And I think that was really surprising that we like from the get-go had like an immediate international following, or they had people that were like interested from around the world. And so I think that was a pleasant surprise, and that's something that like we've kind of, are very aware of when we kind of present ourselves to the public, that we're thinking about more of an international audience than just a national. Yeah. And I think, for my own practice, now, I feel like, my studio is now my room, as you can see. And where I was feeling very discouraged for, many months, and sort of being isolated for many months. Now, I've come over that, and I feel like having Aerogram and seeing all the artists and the work that were coming through, that were representing, was, it was also for myself as well, to kind of hold myself accountable and to make art. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, next one. Are there any pop-up galleries or events that have inspired you to look into this as a possible project?
There are a few. I think they're more sort of like independent, just as what we do. I think that was also another surprising thing, that kind of at the beginning of pandemic, a lot of young curators just graduating from schools were kind of developing their own curatorial projects. And I think I would love, there's some people that I've met sort of behind the scenes, and I would love to be able to start building a collaborative relationship with them, and kind of transforming space. But I think, I can't name anyone right now. I have to look them up, and that would be weird, just sort of you watching me look something up. But yeah, just working on that part too.
Yeah. So for both of us, if we could have unlimited funding and resources, what would be the dream project for Aerogram? I feel like the pop-up idea, like being able to travel and really bring this into different actual like physical spaces.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think being conscious of, that we're still kind of in COVID, a little bit, but doing something outdoors, having at least sort of finding a space where we can represent more than one group of people, and showcase the work outside. I think that would be a really cool idea, and having sort of the resources to do that. Start small.
And yeah. I know I came into this, like, and you were talking about possibly like hosting like a residency program, like in some point in the future, like just being able to bring a lot of different people together in different spaces and different like formats. So digital, physical, different places. My simple dream now is just we haven't worked together in person and like in this project at all. So That's my very simple, at one point, let's get to actually be together in space. Okay, let's see what else.
Crazy idea. Was in Baltimore. There was an abandoned school on North Ave.
Yeah.
It's like massive, you know, it's like neoclassical. It's like way down North Ave. And I was like, I want that building. But it's, you know, you have to have like millions of dollars. You have to have like, you know, donors, and yeah, you have to have like sort of a construction team like at hand. And I don't have that. But I think, you know, sort of my weird reality was like, I want the building first and then build everything around it. So yeah, I guess I feel like the building is off the market now, but yeah.
I mean, there's always new things, new possibilities. So we have a question. I think you two have a lot in common in terms of your artwork. You both focus on symbols, language, and some form of human measurement. Do you two see yourselves making group exhibits based on these themes in the future? It would be really cool to see what other artists dealing with language and such are making. I'm very open to it. I think we're taking this at a pace, like one thing by one thing, because we have a couple different projects floating around always at one point.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, I kind of, before graduating, my last project was sign language. And that was very much inspired from my own artistic practice. So I know like how the work that was featured was amazing. But it was definitely like, once I did it, I kind of understood like my vision versus other people's vision. It's unique in that it's very collaborative. But I don't know. I think, you know, there's so many different themes that we can kind of like work with.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that'll be our opening exhibit when we come back after the summer.
Yeah, so much potential. Let's see. Do you see ourselves doing more outreach programs, or have volunteers or interns helping? Interesting. I don't think we've talked about it quite at this moment. We're just really trying to develop our relationship and what our working style is, especially since we have been remote during this time working together and finishing our respective educations. I think in the future, really anything's possible, especially if we have a physical space, and if we do pop-ups around in different locations, to have volunteers from those places to come be a part of Aerogram for a moment. But yeah, I'm not taking anything off the list of possibilities.
I second that. Yeah.
Definitely, I hope to do a lot more programming though. A lot of like, hopefully engagement, at least virtually, if we can't do it physically in the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why, you know, like when you kind of came on, you were really excited to kind of like carry on the curatorial work, but also like you have a background in public programming, you know, like as do I, but I think I put doing three things, kind of juggling a bunch of different projects within one, is a lot. And so I think, you know, with having you kind of come on, and at least kind of work on the community outreach part of it is, you know, it has like, we're doing this now. Like what I've always wanted to do was to be able to like engage with people. And you've definitely sort of like took and run with it. Yeah, so
we're on, the ball is rolling. And
yes.
Yeah, we're young, we're very open to anyone to contact us, let us know any questions, suggestions, collaborations, reach out, we're both here. I think that's all of our audience questions. Thank you all for sending those in. I think they were really awesome, and I'm glad that we got to connect with y'all a little bit more. So I just want to finish this off by thanking everyone again for joining us in this 1-year anniversary. We really completely appreciate the support from artists and writers around the world, as well as all of our viewers and event participants. And so before we end this, we're just going to announce some of our upcoming things that will be happening. So in June 2021, we will be publishing the 4th and final issue of the Volume 1 edition of the Mobile Library magazine. So it's an online publication that partners 6 artists with 6 writers to create like a unique fine art / literary magazine, which hopefully, fingers crossed, potential publishing or being able to purchase a physical copy, which is in the works. We're figuring that out. And additionally, we mentioned it before, but we have a really exciting open call for our current virtual group exhibition called Isolated But Not Alone. So we're trying to work on how to reflect our experiences during quarantine and the beginning stages of returning to normalcy. So maybe y'all can address the question that Zoe asked me before of what comes after. So the deadline for that is May 29th, 2021. So next month, very soon. And all of our information is on our website at aerogram.org. You can also get a link to it through our Instagram. And if you haven't done so already, please consider donating. We really love to see your support and being able to continue and try to make all those dream and potential possibilities for Aerogram come true. So I'm very happy to finish this off. Congratulations to 1 year, Zoe. I'm glad we did it. I'm glad
Yes, we did. I'm glad you're a part of this. And I'm glad that you're coming with me wherever we go into the future.
So thank you again, everyone, for coming, stopping by and listening, asking questions. We are here for any comments or contact after this, but we will be doing more events and new things very soon. So yeah, thank you so much and hope to see you very soon.